We were still trudging along the shore road, heading towards the pier, when the adults stopped and stared. Aghast, they watched the ferry leave the pier. I looked up with horror, as our only means of transport had just sailed away without us. Uncle Bob exclaimed, "The ferry has sailed without us." Auntie Nellie murmured, "I know, we should have left earlier." "Oh no, what are we going to do?" said Auntie Jenny. "That's the last ferry of the day. Our return tickets will be no use tomorrow." "Never mind tomorrow," said Auntie Nellie. "What are we going to do now? What if we can't get home? Where are we going to sleep?" Hearing her strident tones, the two younger children began to cry. Mum comforted them. "Wish now we'll get something sorted out." Robert, Thomas, Gordon, Ellen and myself stood around looking desolate. I hugged little Marie. Meanwhile, my mum, Ethel, my dad, George, Aunties Nellie and Jenny and Uncle Bob checked their pockets for leftover cash. Dad's wallet was empty apart from our return tickets. This outing was due entirely to my mum having won £5 at the bingo. A lot of money in those days. She and Dad agreed to invite her sisters and their families along on the trip. We had set off early that morning to catch the train to go down the coast to Gourock. Our excitement heightened to fever pitch when we realised that our day out would include a sail on one of the Clyde ferries. This was a first for all of us. All the more exciting when we realised we were crossing the Firth of Clyde to Kilcreggan. As the ferry made its stately progress, Mum, knowing of my interest in geography, called me over. "Margaret, do you know what that is in the distance?" Tentatively, I replied, "It's Ben Lomond." She smiled. "You are a clever girl." Buoyed up by her praise, I spent the whole trip near her, listening to her talk about the scenery. I had to refrain from showing my displeasure as others would come and join in the impromptu lesson. Landing and disembarking passed in a flash, and we hopped, skipped and jumped down the road that led to the beach. Once on the beach, we children ran around like newly released prisoners, scattering our presents across the sands and dunes. When the adults arrived, we were called over and instructed to search for driftwood. They wanted to build a fire, to boil water, to make tea, using the water they had carried from home in large bottles. Such was their need for a cuppa. When sufficient fuel was gathered, Ellen joined us, running off to find adventures. After a while, we began searching for the largest seashells and using these to decorate and build the sandcastles that we built with great care. Gordon, Thomas and Robbie played kick the ball before deciding to involve us girls in a game of chase. Before long, we were all involved in the search for hidden treasure, which our fertile imaginations saw as under threat of being taken away by the imaginary pirate galleon sailing towards our secret hideaway. Only hunger or thirst drew us towards the adults. Meanwhile, other families had joined us on the beach and taken up spots along the length of the beach. Some children joining us in our activities, a few adults venturing into the shallow waters of the River Clyde for a paddle. Those who were very brave swam alongside the shore, not getting into deep water, for it was very cold, icy even. Our mothers must have been up at dawn preparing the abundance of pieces filled with cheese, meat paste or egg, were presented on a checkered tablecloth laid flat on the sand. The adults had buttered versions with slices of meat and tomato. The pieces were soon followed by apples, and finally a slice of Auntie Nellie's special gingerbread, all finished off with bottles of lemonade. Later in the afternoon, Dad called us over and asked, "Have you all been good?" which brought a resounding yes from each of us. Most of us had already heard the ice cream van's familiar jingle, and anticipated rightly there would be a treat in store. Dad must have resembled the Pied Piper as we excitedly skipped along behind him on this magical outing. The afternoon passed as idyllically as the morning. Fun and games, no fighting, no arguing. If they happened, I have forgotten. Now it looked like the magical day was going to finish with us sleeping outdoors, or rough, as Auntie Nellie was overheard saying as the adults discussed their options. It was agreed that Dad and Uncle Bob would go in search of the harbour master, while Mum and her sisters tried to keep us children busy, especially the young ones who were showing signs of tiredness. Dad and Uncle Bob returned triumphant. They had managed to secure the services of a fishing boat. The captain was in port to let some of his crew go on leave. The harbour master had helped with negotiations. So for a small fee, we were transported back to Guruk. The relief of the adults was immediate. Spirits raised as we all trooped onto the pier to board our rescue boat. At the pier, Auntie Jenny stopped and looked down at the vessel in horror, exclaimed in a loud voice, "I'm not going in that!" Realising that Captain would hear her, she changed this to, "That will never hold us all." This was silently echoed by Auntie Nellie, who shook her head in disbelief, but Mum said, "We have no choice. Everyone will need to stay seated and away from the sides. Each of us adults can hold a little one on our knees. Discussion over." Gingerly following Mum, we held onto thick ropes and climbed down into the boat, which reeked of paraffin and fish. Clambering over bits of net and other fishing-related tools, we found places to sit on the low plank around the inside of the boat, and some of us had to sit on the deck that our back against the hull. During this strange trip, suffered the indignity of sitting in seawater and acquiring wet bottoms. I put my arm over the rim of the boat to prevent slipping off my precarious seat, only to be drenched with several huge waves. Looking over the side against Mother's orders, I felt sure we were perilously close to sinking. At one point, Uncle Bob took his pipe out and put it in his mouth. He took out a box of matches and prepared to strike one. His wife, Auntie Jenny, with Marie on her knee, exclaimed over the child's head, "Bob, Bob, put that pipe away. Do you want to blow us all to kingdom come?" Adding in a quite emphatic voice, "Put that pipe away." He'd complied dolefully with a few comments of dissent. I prayed that we would soon reach shore and that I wouldn't be seasick. And at the sight of the Guruk pier, there was a collective sigh of relief. It felt like we had been at sea for an eternity, when in fact the Clyde is only about 2 miles wide at that point. Carefully disembarking, we helped each other to clamber ashore, thankful to be on dry land, and all in one piece. Gathering our belongings, we headed for the train station. We got there to see that last direct train to Glasgow was waiting at the platform. Apparently the harbour master had, feeling sorry for us, had phoned across to request a short delay, so we would not find ourselves stranded for the second time that day. The warmth of the carriage soon dried out our damp clothes. From Glasgow Central, we faced a mile-long walk to our homes on the south of the river. Regaining some of our energy during our journey, we scampered along the familiar seats, laughing and teasing each other. However, tiredness began to show itself and our pace slowed, the youngest needing to be carried by the adults, and our jolliness disappeared as the dusk fell. Before long, hands and faces scrubbed clean and pyjamas clad, we enjoyed a supper of a cup of warm milk and bread and jam, after which, without a murmur of dissent, we brushed our teeth, climbed into bed. After such an eventful day, my younger brothers were almost asleep as soon as their heads touched the pillow. I recall thinking that I must get up early in the morning. I needed to tell my pals about today. It was magic, but soon I too drifted off into a deep sleep. It truly was a summer's day to remember.